now the tail end of the Democratic National Convention, where some U.S. political history was just made, with Kamala Harris becoming the first woman of color to formally accept the nomination of that party for the White House. We're going to unpack some of what we've seen the last little while, heard with two people I've become very friendly with the last little while through this run. Tia Mitchell, Washington correspondent with the Atlanta Constitution-Journal, and Brian Stelter, special correspondent for Vanity Fair. Tia, I want to begin with you. That was a show, wasn't it? I mean, I'm pretty sure that I heard the crowd chanting, yes, yes we can, off the top, which kind of takes us back to Barack Obama days, doesn't it? It felt like that kind of celebration. What's your take on what unfolded here tonight?
Yeah, I mean, she did what she needed to do. Kamala Harris is not, the most amazing speaker, right? She is not a Barack or Michelle Obama or a Bill Clinton in his prime. But she had the enthusiasm at her back, and what she had to do is make sure she didn't mess it up. She had to make sure she could show the American people that she can deliver a good speech. She did deliver a good speech. She outlined policy. I thought it was really strong, particularly when she started to talk about immigration and the war between Israel and Hamas, which are tough issues. And she framed it in a way that I think outlined her, showed her outlook on the issues. And then overall, like you said, the crowd started off, they were behind her from the beginning. It took a couple minutes for her to even be able to start her speech because the crowd was so enthusiastic. All she had to do was not lose them. And I think she did that. And I think people are going to walk away, especially if there's anyone who was watching who didn't know a lot about her or didn't know a lot about what they stood for. They can't say they don't know now. And that's really what was the most important thing she needed to accomplish.
And Brian, I do have a specific question or two for you, but I got to ask off the top, your first thoughts.
There is not a single sentence from the Harris speech that's going to go down in history. This is not about a moment of oratory. Instead, it is about a sense of turning a page in America, because Donald Trump has dominated the political discourse for the last 8 and 9 years. Some Americans want him to come back and stay larger than life. But the majority of Americans, according to polling, do not want him. And for a while, they didn't feel they had an alternative. There was so much dissatisfaction with Biden. What's remarkable about the Harris speech tonight is that Biden could have delivered most of that speech, right? He would have said most of the same lines. But now they're coming from someone new. They're coming from someone who's being reintroduced to the country. And all of a sudden, this election's about an old white guy versus a younger woman of color. I think that's what's going to be memorable about the speech tonight. Not anything Harris actually said specifically, but instead the contrast he represents and embodies. And that contrast is about American ideals, Americans hoping to improve on and create a more perfect union. That is what she's tapping into. And honestly, it's very, very hard for Donald Trump to compete with. Right now, he's calling into Fox News, sounding very upset, sounding very aggrieved. He doesn't have a strong response to Kamala Harris, and that's going to be his challenge in the weeks ahead.
One of the specifics, Brian, that she did make was a call for unity. I want to talk about it in a second, but first let's listen to a clip from her speech on that.
With this election, our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. Not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans.
Brian, it is news to no one that this is a deeply divided country. She is making an appeal there to many people, including undecided voters. Do you think she's reaching any tonight with that?
She wants to portray Donald Trump as an aberration, as an accident of history, as something that was never meant to happen and will never happen again. We don't know if she's right about that, but she spent this speech portraying Trump as this mistake, as this error, and portraying herself as the tough person, not the tough guy we think of as in Hollywood terms, but the tough woman. She portrayed herself as a moderate and as incredibly, exceedingly normal. Those are the words that I think she wants people to think about when they think about her speech.
And Tia, what do you make of her call for unity there?
So I think there are so many, again, everything leading up to her speech kind of set her up to success. We've heard from so many different Americans and several Republicans over the course of the week, which was just kind of unprecedented. And so it allowed her to speak with credibility about those efforts to, again, represent all Americans, not just Democrats and not just people who agree with her on all of the issues. The question is, will that resonate with enough people in the middle? Will that resonate with enough of those Republicans who are kind of over Donald Trump, ready to move on from Donald Trump, but wouldn't naturally fathom themselves as someone who would vote for a Democrat? That is something that I think we can't take for granted. It's one thing to say, I don't really like Donald Trump. I wish our party had a different nominee. It's another thing for Republicans to check the box for a Democrat. And that's why the third party candidates were such a threat to both nominees. But she's making the play. Again, other Republicans are also making the play to say, hey, in this instance, we think the best thing for the future of America to preserve our democracy is to vote for Kamala Harris. It's going to take a couple of weeks, but we'll see if any polling shows that Republicans, you know, even a small swatch of Republicans in some of those key states could be the difference.
But if I can add to that for a moment.
And what do you think, Tia? I mean, it wasn't so long ago that, in the short couple of days after Biden stepped aside and the parlor game in Washington and beyond was, well, who might it be? And it wasn't like it was everybody was unanimously on side with Kamala Harris, and people were talking about all kinds of names popped up. There were concerns that she didn't have what it takes and that she wouldn't be the right choice. Do you think tonight, or this week, weeks since then, but specifically with his speech tonight, that she managed to put those kinds of thoughts, those fears at bay?
Well, number one, I think some of the fears wasn't necessarily about her abilities as much as it was about her electability, which is something different. And I think that the party quickly coalesced around the idea, not just of supporting Harris, but believing she can win. And that happened, I think, more quickly than a lot of people thought it would once President Biden bowed out. I mean, it was almost instantaneous. And it was pretty, among those people who mattered, it was almost unanimous. So, again, she's got to continue to meet the moment. She did so tonight. She's, again, like Brian said, it's not necessarily that these speeches are going to go down in history as like the best piece of oration ever, but she did a good job. She met the moment. She checked all the boxes she needed to check. But she's got to keep that going. We've been talking about the enthusiasm she's benefited from ever since she stepped into that role, ever since Biden kind of handed the torch to her. But she's got to keep that going. She can't afford to really any missteps between now and Election Day.
We talked a lot over the last few days about that energy and that enthusiasm and the benefits of that for the Harris campaign now and in the weeks to come. But as we've also talked, she's also got to take on Trump head on. And she did some of that tonight. One of the ways we've seen today, tonight, and in previous days here at the convention was talking about Project 2025, what many see as a blueprint for the Trump presidency if he were to be reelected, something Trump, for the record, has distanced himself from. But nonetheless, that's an attack point from Democrats against Trump. I want to talk about it with both of you in a second, but let's just listen to a clip first from Kamala Harris on that tonight.
And we know what a second Trump term would look like. It's all laid out in Project 2025, written by his closest advisors, and its sum total is to pull our country back to the past. But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back to when Donald Trump tried to cut Social Security and Medicare. We are not going back to when he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act.
Not the first time we've heard about Project 2025 from Kamala Harris and Democrats. Certainly not the last. Tia, what do you think? Is that kind of tactic getting through to voters? Is it having an effect? Will it have an effect? What's your take?
I think it's absolutely having an effect. The more voters hear about Project 2025, the more they find it problematic. Particularly, it's a driving factor on Democrats, again, making them even more dug into preventing Donald Trump from returning to the White House. But I think for independents, especially women who are independents, that's another kind of group that when they hear about Project 2025, again, they find it troubling. A lot of aspects of that blueprint would really reshape the federal government. And yes, President Trump has tried to distance himself from it, but there are a lot of things in his own statements and policy platforms that reflect the ideals of Project 2025. And then there are just practical connections. People connected to Trump, J.D. Vance, writing the introduction for, there's overlap. So that's why it's such a potent kind of attack line.
You gave such a good answer about Project 2025 before the break. I'm going to move on to something that's upcoming that I think we're now anticipating, the next big things, I guess, and that's the debates. Certainly presidential debates and vice presidential. I wonder what your thoughts are on the risks for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, what Democrats might be hoping doesn't happen. What do you think?
Harris has had a flawless rollout for the past few weeks. She's had these massive events, big rallies in front of crowds of thousands of adoring fans, giving scripted speeches that she can practice ahead of time. The debates, of course, are going to be totally different. She is going to be off prompter, off script. She's going to be face-to-face with Donald Trump. There have been reports that Kamala Harris has never met Donald Trump in person. They've never actually come face-to-face. So that debate scheduled for September 10th is going to be pivotal. And I think we heard a preview of the debate in her speech tonight. One of the most interesting parts of the Harris speech is toward the end when she talks about Donald Trump denigrating America, right? Calling America terrible. And the reality is Donald Trump does like to bash liberal parts of America. He calls California unlivable. He says you can't walk down the street in major cities. He lies repeatedly about these major cities, and he oftentimes criticizes parts of America that he doesn't believe are voting for him. So Harris, on the other side, right, she's going for this idea of patriotism, loving all of America. She's trying to embrace the entire country in a way that is a sharp critique of Trump. And I think we're going to hear that at the debate, or the debates, plural, as well. Right now, we don't know how many debates there are going to be. Harris has agreed to one. She says if Trump shows up, then she'll do another debate in October. But if there is that first debate in September, we're going to see these two leaders with two very different visions of America, right? An America growing or an America in decline. And that tug of war is something that I think is going to probably define the general election, Paul.
So if that is September 10th, Tia, as I look at my calendar and I look 8 days beyond that, we're at September 18th, the day as it stands, Donald Trump may be sentenced to jail.
Right.
How do you think that might play, Tia, for both parties?
So number one, I feel like Donald Trump has been very lucky when it comes to being able to maneuver in the court system. So I wonder if that date's going to stand. That's number one. But I think it's going to play out the way it's been playing out for those who are supporters of Donald Trump, that MAGA America First base, you know, his court cases, these trials, the guilty verdict, any sentences or punishment he may face just reinforces their belief that the criminal justice system is being weaponized against him. Now, what will be interesting is how they frame it, because they've been framing it as President Biden weaponizing the Department of Justice against Donald Trump. Well, President Biden is no longer his opponent. Is he going to now use that same attack and just paste it onto Vice President Harris? Or is he going to find a different way to frame it? That'll be interesting. And again, I think there are Democrats, you know, we saw in the room, anytime there was mention of Donald Trump's legal troubles, they would say, lock him up. They want him to be held accountable.
Brian, last word to you. I'll give you the proverbial one thing to look for. If you can be brief about it, we got a few seconds left.
There is an argument now from Democrats that Donald Trump is both a wannabe autocrat, a dictator, but also this loser. How he responds to this week, this convention, may actually have a very important impact on the election, right? What he does, how he behaves, what he says about Harris, what he comments on, how he handles tomorrow when RFK Jr. is expected to endorse him. We're going to really see the general election form right in front of our eyes in the next few days.
Brian Stelter, Tia Mitchell, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Good to see you. Thanks.